Hello, and welcome to a list video. Yes, I hear you groan. I wouldn't normally do list videos. I do find them to be a bit banal, but I have specific reasons for presenting this list, and that is in the name of Storm of War. The list I want to present has 10 items which form a wish list of sorts for those of us over at Storm of War who are considering running future World War II campaigns on the DCS platform. Now, I'm aware that some people in the DCS community think that Eagle Dynamics should just drop World War II altogether. However, for this video, I am going to accept the position that Eagle Dynamics themselves took on November the 28th, 2017 in their public letter, which stated the following. The Fighter Collection, TFC, Eagle Dynamics' principal partner, has one of the largest private collections of World War II aircraft. TFC has been requesting World War II aircraft for a long time, so we cannot ignore our partner. We and TFC agree that World War II combat aviation is a very interesting flight simulation genre, especially for customers that enjoy history and massive dogfights. TFC has supported this direction from the very beginning. With that said, I'd like to avoid any discussion or argument about the in-principle merits of DCS doing Warbird simulation. As I alluded to before, the list itself is compiled primarily with a view to launching a Storm of War campaign in DCS sometime in 2018. For those of you who are not familiar, Storm of War, or SOW, had been an IL2 Cliffs of Dover server and community for quite a few years now, and we've decided to now look at DCS as a potential sim to run similar 24-hour dynamic multiplayer campaigns. Number 1, the first item on the list is improved damage models for AI and player aircraft. I think most players will agree that this is absolutely critical for the World War II combat, in particular, given the small caliber of the weapons that we are using when compared to the caliber of weapons used in the modern jets. The current damage model has been acknowledged by Eagle Dynamics as being perhaps a little outdated, and I know that guys like Sithspawn have responded to a number of queries on the ED forums for improved damage modeling, and his responses have indicated that such a damage model is being worked on. However, I would suggest that at the moment, some of us feel a little bit in the dark about how this is progressing. But obviously, Eagle Dynamics are aware that such a damage model is needed and have stated they will produce something. On a similar vein to the player damage models, I also am quite keen to have improved damage modeling for the AI aircraft. I don't think the AI damage model needs to be quite as detailed as for human players. However, it should be something that's at least believable. And certainly for a Storm of War campaign where the AI plays a critical role, not only in terms of progressing the campaign itself, but also providing some background environment, having a believable AI damage model that doesn't throw the players into fits of disappointment and disbelief would be quite valuable indeed. The second item on this list is broken down into two subsections. The first being improved flight models and combat behavior for the AI, and the second part being a slightly improved skill modifier for the AI. Taking the first section, we know that Eagle Dynamics sometime late in 2017 mentioned that they had employed someone to rewrite the routines for AI combat behavior. Many people will be aware of the one-dimensional nature of AI combat maneuvers currently. So we certainly would expect that to be improved. This would also apply, I think, to the way that AI does its ground attack and the behavior of multi-crewed AI, such as the B-17. There are quite a few areas where I think some tweaks are necessary, but I understand that Eagle Dynamics are looking at this. The second is something which I am not sure that Eagle Dynamics are looking at, and that is to revisit the skill modifiers of the AI. My impression, and this is quite anecdotal, just based on the experience I have, is that the AI skill levels don't really distinguish from each other clearly. My feeling is that the lowest skill level is a fairly easy opponent to come up against one-on-one. However, beyond the first skill level, and I think there's 4 in total or 5 in total, the remaining few skill levels all appear to me to be very similar and very skilled AI pilots. So it's actually very, very difficult to fight against anything except the lowest skill level. What I'd like to see is the very highest skill level, obviously, to represent the kind of combat behavior that the very best human pilots show online, and then an obvious step down through the levels down to the worst AI pilot, basically representing something similar to an absolute newcomer to the game and really putting up not much of a fight at all. I feel that that's missing at the moment, and I'd love to see that addressed by Eagle Dynamics. And I think it would be very valuable in a Storm of War type environment where you may come across a flight of enemy aircraft where perhaps the trailing ones in the formation have trouble staying in formation, have trouble looking out, and behave rather poorly, whereas the leaders demonstrate some of those expert and veteran combat skills. Number 3, a more historically cohesive plane set. This item applies really to the human-flown aircraft as opposed to AI. And for the Storm of War campaigns, something like a pre-invasion, so we're talking late 43, early 44, plane set would be ideal. We currently have the Spitfire 9, which is really a late 43 Spitfire with the 18-pound boost. The German aircraft we currently have flyable are all mid to late 44, and the P-51 is apparently more of a Pacific theatre configuration. So it would be very nice to kind of bring the focus towards a cohesive set of aircraft, and for me personally, and probably for Storm of War, to be able to run cross-channel action would be ideal. And for that purpose, something late 43, early 44 would be quite fantastic. So we'd be looking at earlier versions of the 109 and 190, a Western Hemisphere version of the P-51, and then if we're really lucky, late 43, early 44 versions of the P-47, and being a bit more ridiculous, maybe something like a Typhoon. Who knows? But certainly it would be good for a focus to be achieved that is based around a cohort of aircraft rather than the current disparate grouping we have. Items 4 and 5 are quite similar to each other, so we can discuss them, I guess, in tandem. Item 4 being a twin-engined Luftwaffe medium bomber, and item 5 being a twin-engine medium for the Allied side. On the Luftwaffe side, having a medium bomber would allow for some cross-channel offensive strikes by the Luftwaffe, and it would allow us to recreate scenarios such as Unternehmen Steinbock and some of the anti-invasion attacks that the Germans attempted around D-Day and then soon after. I understand that Eagle Dynamics has been working on an AI Ju-88. We saw some screenshots of the 3D modelling late in 2017, but information about the progress of that appears to have dried up. Certainly, the AI aircraft would make a fantastic addition and would certainly serve the medium bombing role for quite some time. On the Allied side, the ideal candidate for me is the Havoc, otherwise known in the RAF as the Boston. This aircraft served as a medium tactical bomber from quite early in the war, right the way through. At the moment, we have the B-17, which is really a strategic bomber, and its role in the Normandy campaign was rather limited. We would like to see something that is more suitable for the short hop across the channel and to support the Allied advance once they have landed. So those two aircraft, primarily the immediate demand would be to see them as AI, and then maybe, fingers crossed, down in the far distant future, we may get flyable versions. Certainly these would be at the top of the wish list for AI medium bombers, one for the Luftwaffe and one for the Allies. Number 6 on this list is changes to the Normandy map. The first of these changes would be basically to see Eagle Dynamics continue to flesh out the map as it is. There are quite sparsely populated areas in the east, up in the direction of Abbeville, Boulogne-sur-Mer. There are some sparsely populated areas in southern England, which is almost completely depopulated, and around the Rouen area in the southern part of the map. So the first item would just be to see some of those towns and villages and areas fleshed out and completed. The second one is perhaps a little more left field, but I think is vital in order to be able to extend the historical lifetime and the applicability of the Normandy map. And this would be to make the advanced landing grounds in and around the invasion beaches removable by mission makers. In the perfect sort of scenario for me, by setting the mission date to before June 6, 1944, you would then get a map that had none of those advanced landing grounds on it. And this means that the kind of historical usability of the map would go from being its current 3 months, which is essentially June to August 1944, out to potentially 3.5 years of the Western Theatre conflict, from the close of the Blitz campaign against England all the way to August, September 1944. Obviously, that would be plane set permitting as well, but I think it seems a little short-sighted to have built a map which really only represents 3 months of what was 5 or nearly 6 years of aerial combat in this part of the world. Number 7 is a somewhat cosmetic addition, but it would be certainly lovely from an immersion point of view to have German, British/Commonwealth and US period voice packs, particularly for ground handling and air traffic, but also for the wingmen. I flew Bunyap's Spitfire campaign, and unfortunately quite a large element of the immersion was broken with the use of the default modern American voice packs using NATO nomenclature. So certainly I think there's room for including period voice packs, that's German voices for those flying Luftwaffe, perhaps British and Commonwealth voices for those in the RAF, and US accents/voices for those flying American aircraft. Number 8 is another item that we know is in progress currently, and we saw some screenshots of this towards the end of 2017 as well. And this is for the completion of the external stores, the bombs, and the bomb racks on the Spitfire Mark 9. Currently, the range of the Spitfire is incredibly hamstrung by our inability really to do cross-channel sorties. For a Storm of War campaign to exist pre-Normandy, it's basically essential that we are able to fly Spitfires across the channel and back. In previous games such as Cliffs of Dover, we've been able to enjoy that flight across the channel and experience certainly the mid-channel combat with all the pilot care that's required to ensure that you can get back home from across the water if you've taken damage. And to be able to recreate that feeling in DCS would add a lot to a Storm of War campaign. Number 9. Working trains in multiplayer. Okay, this might sound like a rather picky little item, but for a Storm of War campaign, we like to include a lot of strategic elements such as supply lines and equipment and that sort of thing. And so to be able to create a supply line that can also be affected by player behavior, being able to use the rail network would be a massive bonus. So the first thing obviously would be to have trains that both run and are visible on the map. The second thing would be to be able to connect those trains and the train lines to some kind of supply system. Much of that could probably be done in the background through Storm of War's coding. However, the basic functionality of getting those trains working, getting them visible, and getting them running on lines that connect cohesively would go a long way towards being able to realize that for a Storm of War campaign. The last item on the list is something I have previously posted on the DCS Wishlist forum itself, and that is for a filter to be included in the mission editor, which would specify the year in which any specific unit first became operational. The reason I asked for this is because for a lot of us, we don't have a very good working knowledge, particularly of the ground units in game. And in the past, I've found myself placing accidentally modern anti-aircraft units on what I thought was supposed to be a Second World War mission. So to have a filter where I can filter out any units after a certain date, or I can only specify that I want to use units within a specific date, would really improve the workflow when it comes to mission making, and would certainly help us build a campaign a lot faster than it currently does. This is going to become an increasing problem as Eagle Dynamics add more and more units to the game, including perhaps obscure ones that we're not necessarily familiar with. As an aside to that, it would also be quite nice if all units could be made available to all factions, with a filter to filter out those that perhaps were not historically or are not currently in service with that faction. This just allows us to have a bit more flexibility with using some units that might be strictly out of theatre, but for the sake of a mission that works, we need to be able to include them. So that concludes the top 10 list. I would love to hear other people's suggestions, particularly those who have flown Storm of War campaigns in the past and know the kind of thing we look to achieve. Feel free to dump your suggestions in the comments. And as usual, happy hunting.